G'day everyone, it's Dave Watson here. Pleasure to be with you, albeit virtually. Really excited to share with you some of the work my team has been doing using sound to keep tabs on the environment and particularly explore the relevance that has within a connectivity conservation framework. So let's get this party started. So here we go. So if you've been paying attention, it's a pretty good time to be involved in acoustic monitoring. Lots of tech has excited a lot of people. Last year, one of the largest philanthropic donations ever to a university, Lisa Yang gave $24 million to Cornell to really spearhead their work in the conservation acoustics space. Great place to invest because they're already the champions of eBird and many other sort of bioinformatics capabilities. So very exciting initiative there. We see the big tech companies, so Google has invested a lot in acoustic work, primarily to do with speech recognition in humans, but that's been broadened out to a whole lot of different applications as well. For the scientists in the audience, 11,000 citations, not too shabby. And we see also Microsoft spending, devoting a lot of effort to really finessing how sound can be used for a wide range of monitoring applications, including in the environmental space. And that's now being picked up by NGOs, World Wildlife Fund, other international conservation NGOs see the role of sound in not just keeping tabs on the environment, but in engaging with people to be a pretty important area to focus on. And we see now real proliferation of tech, many of them, quite user-friendly. You can have them on your phone. My favorite is Frog ID, Jody Rowley's team at Australian Museum. Fantastic way of connecting people with nature, but also of basically crowdsourcing one of the largest and most up-to-date distributional databases of any group of organisms. So, spectacular effort. So what we're talking about here is when you're choosing a monitoring method in ecology, there's many different approaches. Some tell you a little bit about a whole lot, the wide angle lens approach. Others, you zoom in and you spend more effort on one particular group of organisms, one particular set of ecological processes. You find out a lot about those, but you can't necessarily extrapolate beyond that. So it's a bit of a, within a fixed budget, you've got a bit of a balancing act to try and accomplish, to keep it broad, to make it as relevant and inclusive as possible, but also maybe tailor it so it's specific to your particular area, to particular taxa that are relevant to your question, your system. And that's a balancing act that many ecologists try and strike when they're coming up with a monitoring plan for many different applications, including in the conservation connectivity space. So where we are with acoustic monitoring, it really promises to do both, to give you that broad brush, whole of system picture, but also you can zoom in and look at particular things in exquisite detail. That's the promise. Where we are now, we're not there yet. We're not there yet. A fair bit of investment has been made. A lot of those big ticket items I mentioned at the start are really devoted to human speech recognition, which really does demonstrate that if you throw enough money at it, you can achieve, great inroads. Those of us old enough to remember the early speech recognition know that, it's come a long way really quick. And that's by virtue of this investment we've seen. But what we've really done now is we've shifted the problem. Rather than being an ecologist's job to do all the data collection, we've shifted that to now a whole lot of data, and so really the heavy lifting is done by programmers rather than field ecologists. But we're getting there, and one of the priorities that my group has been working on is long duration recordings. So not just minutes or days, the typical unit of sampling for an ecologist. We're talking weeks, years. and not just specific to one particular place, one particular group of organisms, but broad scale, continent scale, and soundscape scale. So what you can hear here, that's the Southeast Queensland rainforest. There's a lot going on there, okay? And what we're doing, we've come up with a way of banking that information using the astronomical model of an observatory. So we all pool our money. It's a shared resource that we use collectively, and all data are open access and freely shared. So we've got 360 acoustic monitoring stations out there right now, recording 24/7. In 5 years, that's going to give us about 2,000 years of continuous sounds. This is a big operation, generating petabytes of data. And the promise is that that's going to allow us to make a whole series of comparisons and address a whole range of questions at a resolution that really hasn't been achieved with other ways of keeping tabs on things. Now, this is not just me. This is a team of people led by Paul Rose Group, Queensland University of Technology, CSU, where I'm based. And we've got Lynn Schwarzkopf, James Cook, Rich Fuller at UQ, and Paul McDonald at UNE. Lots of things are ongoing in this space, but what I'm talking about here is basically the framework. The investment's been made now in all this kit and all the servers backing up all these files. And now I want to give you a little window into some of the things you can do with long duration recordings, and particularly their relevance to connectivity conservation. I'll have to shift my screen there. I've been a bit stingy with there we go. So this was from an earlier paper with many colleagues, really unpacking what does monitoring for connectivity conservation look like. It's complicated. There's lots of things you want to try and do. There's lots of things you want to try and keep tabs on. This is where I believe acoustic monitoring can really help. And there's a lot of different aspects of monitoring where using sound can address many of the questions you're trying to answer, but also informing the broader narrative about why you're doing this and who you're trying to convince and who you're trying to engage and who you're trying to retain in this endeavor. Because this is not just science. This is land management. This is bringing people together. This is, making connections as much with people as it is, on ground and in terms of population processes. So to give you a quick example here, let's go to the middle of the country. That map there is color coded. The washed out yellow. There's about one person there to a 10 square kilometre chunk of land. So Australia, big place, and a lot of it has very, very few people. So just getting there is quite often the challenge. And if you can go there only a few times, but leave some tech there doing things while you're gone, then you've sort of cracked the real efficiency gains, so you can get high resolution data, contemporaneous high resolution data from the comfort of your own home. So these are some sensors we put out there in 2014, the first generation that are now rolled out in this fancy device, so a bit more compact. For the acoustic observatory. Move that in there, and then you can actually see me. And for the initial comparison, Dave Smith, for his honours work, compared some of the data that you're getting from these machines, from these long duration recordings, with what you see with regular bird surveys, in this case, about 18 years worth of creekline surveys. Worth noting that very similar results, so quite trustworthy in terms of, yes, getting most of the things, missing a few things like raptors and swallows and stuff. But critically, the microphone on this kit, this bad boy right here, that's got a range of 100, 200 meters, thereabouts. These creek lines are 3-4 kilometers long. And it's fascinating that we were seeing the same suite of species on that fixed point over a longer duration than we were seeing walking up and down multiple kilometers of these arid zone creek lines. So the real trick to understanding the power of acoustic sampling, acoustic monitoring, is that long duration. It takes the same amount of money to go out there and put a bit of machinery in the ground and leave it for a week, as it does for 2 or 3 weeks or a month or a year. It's just the size of the SD card and where you end up sticking the files. So longer duration recordings is really our priority and where we've been focusing our efforts. And you can use those to find the literal, the figurative needle in a haystack. Where is the beastie? And in this case, the needle is this bad boy, pied honeyeater, a dapper dresser, beloved by birders. Quite enigmatic. Keast first worked out that they come and go in the arid zone and there's all sorts of things going on that might explain it, but they're very tricky to pin down. You never really know where they're going to be or what they're going to be doing. But this is a long duration recording here. This is 24 hours, this spectrogram. And you can see a trace here, really quite obvious in both of those sets of acoustic indices. So this is compressed. That's a whole from midnight to midnight in one ribbon plot there. And that corresponds to pied honeyeater, a male sitting up in an acacia, just singing his little heart out. And so for his honours work, Dave Smith went through, just scanned visually, just looked at those 24-hour ribbon plots, no pied honeyeater, no pied honeyeater. Oh, there might be, let's have a listen. No, that's the wind. And went through and coded. He did this for black and for pied honeyeater. When they're there and calling, and when they're not there, or presumably not there, but maybe they're not there, maybe they are there and they're not calling. It gets complicated. But that's about 4 years of data there for 4 creek lines, and we can see quite clear-cut patterns of this little pulse of when they appear. And then Chi Wei, for her honours, revisited this and looked at, okay, so they're there, they're not there, what's happening in the periods when they are there, and using satellite-derived information on greenness, an index called NDVI, that's like a fairly broad brush approach to how green is the place. You can see it lines up quite nicely that you're getting pied honeyeaters appearing after these greening events around these creek lines, and that corresponds to La Nina years like the one we're all enjoying right now. And interestingly, she dug deeper, and at each of these points when they were calling males, she actually went back to the recordings, zoomed right in and had a listen and extracted calling rate. How many times are these males calling? And there's a very tight relationship between how much they're calling and time since these rainfall events, which correlates with resident males really ramping up that calling activity associated with breeding. And the reason all that works is because of the hero in this photograph, Eremophila. That's the main nectar-bearing plant that Alan Keast reminded us determines the pace and tempo and distribution of these outback lurkers. And so really what we can do from the comfort of our own lounge room with remotely sensed data and open access acoustic data, we can marry up what's happening over vast areas to track not just who's there and who's not, but why, what might be driving that pattern that we're seeing, in this case, a connection between pollinator and a native plant. So really, rather than rummaging around hoping to find something spiky, it's akin to using a magnet to just get right to the thing you're after, right to that needle. So wrapping things up here, there's this idea in restoration that's pretty passé now, the field of dreams hypothesis, that if you put all the plants in, the system will magically reboot. If you build it, they will come. You put the tube stock in, and all those wonderful critters just magically appear. Now, many people have debunked this and said, well, actually, it's a bit more complicated than that. Not everything moves, and if you really care about like lizards and frogs and things that aren't too good at moving, you might want to plonk them in there. So the field of dreams hypothesis has been roundly debunked, but we'd like to recast it. Rather than if you build it, they will come. If they hear it, they will come. So turning acoustics around, rather than making it a passive, purely a monitoring approach, together with Liz Znajdusic, we've suggested that you can use sound to bring in organisms. Now, acoustic lures have been used for seabirds, for individual species for quite a while, but whole of system sound using soundscapes and mixtapes of soundscapes. After a bushfire, okay, here it is, we're back in business. Broadcast the calls, you're going to accelerate the rates of recolonization, but even if these animals don't come and stay, they come, they're there, have a bit of a scratch, maybe have a little defecate, and you're re-inoculating the soil with bacteria, with fungi, with all those things that make the entire food web work. So that's acoustic restoration, and that's one of the areas we're exploring with our future work. So to wrap up, I've got a couple of take-home messages. For land managers, I'd say if there's a particular group of animals that you're after, particular group of processes that you're really interested in, it's going to be simpler for you now. Just go out and measure it directly. Don't rely on some mythical programmer that's going to ride in out of the sunset and magically analyze your data for you. That's unlikely to happen. For the scientists in the room, there's a lot of ecology you can do with sound, not just the things that vocalize, the birds and the bats, the frogs and the insects, but you can also get a little window into these interactions, and often across quite long timeframes, quite large distances that are often out of reach for many different approaches. And for all of you here today, I'd say think of long duration recordings a bit like photographs. Just do it as part of your standard practice. And down the road, they're going to be such valuable resources in terms of seeing how far you've come, of seeing just how much you've already achieved, and really giving stakeholders, giving people so much to rally around in terms of why this place is worth looking after. So look, thank you so much for your time. And I'll be part of the panel afterwards. Looking forward to any questions you might have. Cheers.